one of the things that I didn't hit in the earlier session that I think is worth bringing up is we have talked a lot about how our problem is not our liturgy, and I really don't think that the problem is our worship. But I do think there are still places where we can optimize that for visitors. So without changing a word of the Book of Common Prayer, without changing, that wasn't meant to be as a prayer book revision thing. I meant without changing a word of the liturgy that you regularly use, without changing a single gesture in your ceremonial, you can still help scaffold a newcomer coming into that worship. So thinking about things like, do you have, if you use your prayer books, every page number readily available for someone to be able to navigate the prayer book? If you put words that they need in a bulletin, does it make sense? Do they have scaffolding do you write extra rubrics so that people can know what they're supposed to do with? Better yet, do you have maybe marginal notes that explain to someone who has never been to sort of a formal, full liturgical church what is going on at different times? What are the different colors? What are the different hangings? What are the different vestments that people are wearing? Why is this stuff happening? Things that you can do to remove some of that extra cognitive load that people have to bring the temperature down a little bit. There are ways that you can still make your worship more accessible without changing anything about your worship. And so that's not what we're talking about today, but that is something to have in the back of your mind as a matter of hospitality as well. Go through with someone, and we're going to talk a lot about this, going through with someone who has no experience of your community. Go through with someone who has never been an Episcopalian and have them mark in your bulletin all the words they have no idea what it means. Do things like that, and then doesn't even mean take it out, but put a parenthetical citation about what the word is. Do some glossing of words that are unfamiliar, or figure out synonyms, even if it is a slight move away from our optimal language that we would use in the beauty of holiness, or whatever it might be. Again, that doesn't have to mean you change anything about the worship itself, but how you scaffold that worship can make a big difference for how accessible or inaccessible that worship is. So we're moving now into more practicality. This morning, we talked about hospitality and follow-up as baptismal expectations, as rooted in our theology of hospitality that is itself rooted in Scripture and our baptismal promises. We talked about how when people come, if they come, and they don't have any connection points or follow-up, they leave and they don't come back. And we talked about, like I just referenced, that we don't really have a product problem. We have, maybe we can say, a PR and a customer service problem, right? The issue is not our central identity things. The issue often is how people are able to get to or access those central identity things that we have. So I want to bring us back to my story that I had at the beginning. It was a story about an inhospitable church, and I will say, I will never reveal what congregation that was, except that it was not in the Diocese of Chicago. It was a failure of communal hospitality, of interpersonal hospitality, but it was also a master class in how architecture and arrangement of space conveys a particular message. So I said, if you remember, I went to the door at the back of the nave, which looked like the front door. The door that made the most sense for someone who had never been on that property to go in. In many of our churches, that is not actually the main door people use for a variety of reasons, right? That might be because it's not the most accessible door. I know at Trinity Oshkosh, that front door has the least usable stairs. And so many times those who know the property are going to go into a door that is other than what looks like to someone who has never been to your church, the front door. And then sometimes we have really odd structures where something that looks like a front door drops you into a place liturgically that doesn't make sense either. right? So, some places have something that looks like a front door that if you go through it, it'll drop you like right in front of the chancel, which is not where you normally want to come into a nave. But by positioning no usher at that front door, they were using their space to say, this is a place for people who already know what they're doing. This is a place for those of us who are already part of the community. It is not a place for new people. And so what we're going to be talking about today is where people get lost when coming to your church. We're going to be talking about that as the physical plant, and we're also going to be talking about that in terms of your digital presence. I know that there is probably also the question that has come up because we're talking about what happens when people show up to your property. So the question might arise, well, what if no one is doing that? What if no one is showing up to your church regularly? We're going to talk a little bit about that with our digital presence, but I'll just forward that by saying that is a real possibility in some places, that there's just really no trickle of newcomers, or very few newcomers. But I would also challenge you to say, what can we do to try and be even more aware of whether there are newcomers? Because sometimes there are people who come and leave and are so invisible that we don't realize it. One of the things actually that was a big deal at Trinity when I got there was this persistent strain of, we don't have any young people. Like, this, as though there were no young people in the church. And I had to do a lot of work to say, okay, but what about this person? And what about this person? What about this person? What about this person? What about this person? And eventually you could rattle off 10 to 15 people who were under the age of 30 who were somehow connected with the church. And they say, oh, well, yeah, I guess that's true. And we have to sometimes interrogate those stories that we tell ourselves over and over and ask ourselves, do we even actually have this problem that we keep narrating? Or is this actually a storytelling problem? Do we actually need to relearn how to narrate what is the reality of our community at a given point? But I will say there are instances where there's just really no one coming with any regularity. And those are times where we can do some stuff to beef up digital presence. But it's even more important to be really on your game about how to be hospitable, because what do you do then when someone does show up? Because even in churches that have almost no visitors, there are still some visitors sometimes. And so being ready for that and realizing that it's that much more important to be able to do follow-up and make sure that you get those people connected with the community, because they have made a really conscious choice to come and check out a place that maybe is off the beaten path, or maybe would not otherwise be someplace that a lot of people are going, really connecting and figuring out why does that person feel drawn to our community. But as we think about space, I want you to think about this question. If you followed a first-time visitor through your building and through scrolling on your website with a camera, what would they see? What would their experience of that place be? Not what you hope it would be, not what your experience as someone who already knows what the layout of your property is, but what would their experience be? Really thinking, I have never been to this property before. And so actually, you can probably put it back even before arriving. You've Googled it, or you have gotten the address somehow. You are driving up to whatever that is going to dump you out on, whatever the entrance that Google has decided is the entrance to your property. What is the experience as soon as you start turning into that entrance to getting into your worship space or getting into your program space? What is that like? Think about that for a second. And then similarly, think about your website. What is it like opening your website? We're going to be going through and actually auditing that in a second, but I really want you to get into that mode of, as someone who has never been there, not as someone who already knows all the quirks and knows how to navigate all the quirks of your space. So the first thing that we're going to be moving into is thinking about the hospitality of your space and how we can do a space audit of your community. So this is a really big and important thing, and we'll talk sort of two different domains. We'll talk about the actual physical plant and navigation, how confusing or accessible is your actual plant. And I don't just mean accessible in terms of different abilities, I mean accessibility in terms of, do people know what doors to go into, what paths to take, what quirks, again, of space usage there are. And then we'll talk about how do you make sure that you present a attractive space to the people who are coming in. So remember that our space speaks before anyone has opened their mouth for someone to come in. Before someone greets you, the property and how accessible or frustrating it is has already spoken to the person who is visiting for the first time. And this is something that is well established in a lot of hospitality research, is that looking at hospitality and customer service research is that the layout of somewhere, both in terms of how physically attractive it is, how clean it is, and then also how much it can be navigated easily by someone who has never been there, makes a huge impression on someone and can be a significant part about whether someone decides to continue engaging with that community, with that service, with that, whatever it might be. And especially as we're thinking about this for people who are already potentially anxious, who are already potentially unsure about whether they want to do this thing. Think about the person who's sticking their toe back into Christianity after 15 years. We don't want to have unnecessary barriers to them coming and actually encountering what we have, because there's already enough barriers that they're going through and pushing through. So one of the things you'll hear, there's various numbers. Sometimes you hear within the first 30 seconds, someone has made up their mind if they're coming back. Within the first 7 minutes, someone has made up their mind if they're coming back. Those numbers are hard to pin down exactly, so don't put too much stock in the exact time frame. Do put stock in that there is a clock that is ticking as soon as someone gets there, and that every second that goes by, it gets harder and harder and harder to undo earlier impressions. That doesn't mean it's impossible. So let's say you have a terrible first experience with parking or navigation towards the main door, but then the service is just extraordinary. Maybe you can make up for that. But that means that you have to have everything else going exactly perfect. By having everything at the front end pretty well put together, you can give yourself a little bit more breathing space and a little bit more room to have maybe not as great of an impression later on in the experience that the person has. So you really want to make sure that those first moments that someone has as a newcomer in your space are as frustration and disgust-free as possible. So I talked about the space that when I went into that building at that church I was visiting, the obvious door didn't have anyone there. The only usher was at that inside entrance, and I had to hunt them down. Now I knew to hunt them down too. If you're someone coming and you don't know, well, are there going to be screens? Are there going to be books? Is there going to be a bulletin? This, even realizing that there would be a service booklet to follow along with, already assumes insider knowledge. It's very possible that if I didn't know that usher was there, I would have never gotten a bulletin, and I would have been completely lost from that point forward. So remember that our spatial organization of people and ministries conveys a message about welcome. So that's the physical aspect, and we're going to do a space audit in a second, but before we get to that, I want to think about also, what does the stuff in our church look like? Does anyone notice that churches collect things over time? Yeah, we love to get stuff come in and never get rid of it. Detritus collects all over the place.
Well, my great-grandmother gave that, so.
Well, yeah, maybe, yes. So someone's great-grandmother gave the old 5-gallon bucket that the salt is in outside of our door, right? I was actually in a church once where there were plaques on Target bookshelves. So the plaque cost more than the bookshelf almost certainly did. These are $40 bookshelves, and they have brass plaques saying who donated the bookshelf. So yes, very much, that is one of the reasons that we have detritus that builds up in our churches. But then it also is just kind of like how homes do. And so this relates back to that earlier hygiene thing, is that when you don't notice it, because, well, this is just us, it's not as big of a deal to you. But I can promise you, that snow shovel that is at the doorway in June, those inexplicable cardboard boxes in your undercroft, the plastic bag that covered the Christmas tree that's kind of just left in the narthex rather than put away, those coats that have been on the coat rack for 3 years, the stuff that is in your lost and found that has never been sorted through. And this is the thing that drives me nuts. People, rather than learning how to switch out toilet paper on the toilet paper rolls, who just put a new toilet paper on top of an old tube that's empty, like those are the sorts of things that to us, who are insiders, don't bother us anymore, because this is our space. That's just how we are. But to someone who is new, it communicates not necessarily that you don't care about me, but it communicates that there's some inertia and entropy, and maybe this place isn't really thriving. Again, this is the place that is most like actual physical human hygiene that we need to be, this is physical, but in personal hygiene that we need to really be aware of, is that this doesn't communicate so much that you don't care about me directly. What it communicates is, I'm not sure if they care about themselves, so how are they going to care about me? And so we really need to be careful with what our space looks like. Actually, one thing that was suggested, Tricia Lyons, who is a professor of theology at Virginia Theological Seminary, she came up and did a evangelism workshop for the Diocese of Wisconsin. And one of the things that she talked about was having a dumpster party. Rent a dumpster, get a ton of people to come, and aggressively go away and throw away the crap in your church. Again, those coats that have been there for forever, the lost and found that no one has ever picked up, the boxes that show up for no reason. Now maybe you get a recycling bin too, but have some regular times where you go through and aggressively clear out clutter and junk so that your space is clean. And actually, I want to say, St. Paul's, your space is great. Like, I am really impressed. Like, you're doing better than we are in terms of not just having stuff all over the place. Like, this is a well-kept space. So bravo to you for doing that. And that was something that I noticed when I was in. One of the things that I think that is good is, and I talked about this just a little bit, is getting people with completely fresh eyes to look over either your space, or we'll talk about it in your website too. Find someone who has no familiarity with your property to come and maybe pay them. Like this is also one of the things I recommend. Saying we'll give you $100 to come and give us your completely honest evaluation of what it is like to come to a service with no other information about our community. And so do a debrief with them afterwards, but say, be brutally honest about what the experience of navigating the plant was like, where were the friction points, where were the points that they were completely and utterly lost, what was the stuff that they noticed that seemed off-putting to them. Do that, and then also get some people to do basically opposition research for you. So get some people to put on the hat of someone who is actively looking for a reason to not come back to your church, to come and walk the space and point out every single thing, even trivial things, that could be a reason someone could use to say, no, I'm not going back there. This is maybe like grime on windows. It's stuff often that we excuse. We say, well, we just don't have the people to do it. No one really goes there. Or, think about all the reasons that you have and put those aside and allow yourself to really inhabit the mind of someone who is actively looking for a reason to not come back to your church. Because that is also subconsciously sometimes what is going on with people who come, but come in a conflicted way. Is that there are people who are sticking their toes out, but they're also saying, but I'm looking for any reason to not have to keep doing this. People who are wrestling with God, wrestling with their history, wrestling with their relationship with the church, are going to probably be having some of these like looking for outs. And so if you can go through and aggressively find all of those outs that they might have and take them away, you are more likely to have them continue coming to your community. So, our first exercise, and we're actually going to do an exercise now together, is I'm going to have you do a virtual space audit. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take just a couple minutes with paper and draw your physical plant roughly. You don't have to do it exactly, but draw all of the spaces that are related to your property, including, if you can, some roads that come around it and where those entries are. And once you have that, I want you to think about someone is driving in their car or walking. I know some of you might have places that are primarily walking spaces. But think about both. If you were in a place that has limited parking, that is already a friction point probably. And think about that. And it might be something you can't do anything about. But that is something that maybe then you signal in, say, your website or your Google profile. So think about someone is approaching your property. They're approaching your property based on the path that Google would tell them to take. And maybe if you want to take your phones out and actually just pick a random address in your area and then have it send you to your church. See what Google or Apple Maps is going to tell you to do. And you can do that now if you wanted to. So then the next thing you're going to do is they pull in. They pull into whatever the natural entrance point for either a car or a pedestrian is. From that point, draw the path that they would take most logically, given the layout of your property, to find their way to your worship or program space. This is, again, not the path you would take. This is the path, well, it might be. I mean, maybe you take the most natural visitor path, but take the path that someone who has never been there is going to try to intuit to get to wherever your space is. So, okay, well, there you go already. Yeah. So maybe you have multiple paths that you draw if you have multiple parking lots in different places. But that's, again, a place where it would be good to see, where does Google drop you out? Where does Google Maps or Apple Maps drop you out?
Ship at sea, sunken at
Marge.
my favorite picture that I ship at sea at night, sunken. Black sheep.
Realize as you're doing this, there might be a natural instinct to want to start getting defensive or defending your property or explaining why it's the case that certain things are that way. All of which is completely understandable and maybe even correct. But we remember we're setting that aside right now because none of that matters to a visitor. None of that, no, the visitor does not care whether it is because of 160 years of landlocked history or whatever it might be that means you don't have a parking lot. They just realize you don't have a parking lot. That's all they know. So this is not the time to begin rationalizing why the path is that way. Even though later on you might have to get to a point where you say there are just certain things we cannot change. And then you have to figure out if that is a friction point, how you manage that friction. It's also worth remembering though, if it's a friction point, you still have to do something about it. Even if you can't change it, you still have to learn how to manage it. So this is the next point that we're going to get to, is you've got your path. Along that path, mark friction points. Friction points are points of uncertainty. Decision points that people have to make without any guidance from signage. Things where people would hesitate. Things where people would be completely confused. And you might even add to this, how would someone who is brand new get from your worship space to a bathroom? That can also,
We don't have those.
you don't have bathrooms?
We don't have those.
Because that is probably the second most likely thing that people are going to get frustrated about, is if they have to use the bathroom and they can't find it. So mark those friction points. Again, that might be level changes that don't have an explicit direction that you're supposed to go. That might be multiple buildings that are not clear about what those purposes are. And again, this is a place where you have to put yourself in the space of someone who is not an insider. So for us, sometimes it's obvious what's the church building and what's the parish hall. But for someone who doesn't know those sorts of architectural cues, they might think, and this is something that happens in my building, A, it's a church and a school next door, and they don't know that they're even connected to each other. Or B, it's two churches. Because we have about 6 different churches like within 3 blocks of us. So it wouldn't be unusual that there's 2 churches next door to each other. So think about those friction points.
Which one's the church, which one's the parish?
You all have a pretty good feeling of that right now? So circle the biggest one. What is the one that is the most likely to get someone to say, "No, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore," or "I'll get in there and I'll come now, but I was too frustrated to keep coming back." What is the most likely to be the "I'm getting back in my car and going home" moment? No? Well, yeah, I mean, that's an easy one. You don't even get out of the car.
Google drops you where there's no parking. That I didn't realize. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's where, I didn't know that Google, that's where it's. Glad I Googled it.
That may be something that you can, actually.
It better, somebody.
There's maybe some Google fixes too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that just got brought up, in looking at that maps, either Apple Maps or Google Maps drops you somewhere that is unintuitive to you. There are some things you can do. You can reach out to Google and see if they can change what is the entrance point to your property. If you have a Google profile associated with your church, you can also change the address. So you can change it to be the address of the parking lot or the address of so like for a long time, our Google address was our parish hall, which is not what anyone is ever actually coming for. No one is ever actually going to the office when they're a visitor. They're coming to the church building. So I just changed our address from the parish hall to the church building, and now 203 Algoma Boulevard is our address, not 311 Division Street. So those are some of the things that you can do. But then if you can't do that, signage is what you need. If you invest in a fixed sign on the side of your building, next to your building, somewhere very large that says parking this way, if Google Maps is going to drop you right in front of a no parking stop. But look at those other technical fixes first before you need, although I will say, improvements in navigational signage are never a bad investment. Never a bad investment. So think about this for one specific achievable fix for that primary point that you can implement right now. This could be, we will have a greeter there who will help with questions when someone gets there. It could be that we are going to invest in a nice permanent sign. Or non-permanent, get some of those A-frame signs and put the nice standards boards in. That's actually what we did, is we have signs that come in and out before all of our services because we have too many entrances. We just have so many different ways that people can get to the same place that we need to be able to say, yes, any of these will get you to where you want to go. So think about a way that you could fix whatever that issue is. I will say one thing that's nice is you can get those like metal snap frames that you can print out just with paper, something that looks pretty professional. You slap it on the wall and you have some arrows with your branding in terms of language of what direction people are supposed to go. And then if you have events at other times, you can snap it and turn it and point the other direction. So that because that's one of our issues is that we have landings that are not at the level of any of the stuff. So all of our zero grade entrances drop you at decision points. And so we have a lot of that kind of directional signage that says worship this way. But if we have something going on in our undercroft, we have to switch it all out. So it says event downstairs.
So how do you push back against the objection response of that looks tacky? We shouldn't have directional signage in a worship space. It's a sacred space. You know, like just that thinking of people who, especially if their great-grandparent have, ironically, a plaque above that door. Like, how do you make it to where it's okay to have a metallic-looking thing that has the restroom sign that arrow points?
So some of it is reminding them what is actually the worship space, that most of the decision points that are difficult are staging areas. The narthex is not a sacred space, right? The portico is not a sacred space. You want it to be attractive, but there are better and worse looking signs. I would not recommend writing out in Sharpie and then taping up with painter's tape signage. That's probably not the best way to do it, although that still may be better for the person who's looking for a bathroom than no sign at all. But that's not a permanent solution. But there are ways that you can invest. Again, I think that those like metal snap signs that look like pictures, if you have branding for your church, make sure that it is well-designed signage. So there's a couple places. So I am AI ambivalent. But one of the places that large language models can be helpful is if you have a brand kit, or even don't, describe sort of the character of your space and say, design a sign for me. It will then describe the layout of how you can have a sign. You can also say, this is what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to move people from here to here. What is the most efficient way to make the wording on that signage? And those are the sorts of things that they're great at. So Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, those are great for those sorts of things. Don't use it to actually create the sign. You need to be the person who takes the instructions and actually translates that on a word processor or layout software. But use the LLM to describe to you what the sign should look like, and it'll give you a pretty nice, at least workable using sign. Ask it what fonts you should use, and it will give you great design choices that you don't have to think about or be a designer for. So I think that's some of what you do. Some of it is also reminding people that I think the theological value of hospitality and saying, yes, sometimes our values conflict. And we're not going to put any obtrusive signage in the nave itself, or certainly not around the sanctuary itself. But around that, at the decision points, those are places that we want to make sure we're getting people into our beautiful worship space.
And you need to declutter the path.
That's right, exactly, yeah. Well, that is a good thing you can bring up. You say, if you're so concerned about the beauty of our space, then why do we have all these boxes stacked up right on the bench where people would sit in the narthex, right? So we're going to move to our second audit, and this might go a little bit more quickly to allow for some of that time for questions from you before we move into breakout session. But the other front door that people have is your website. The website is one of the most important ways people encounter your church that exists. The website is probably, if you are having no visitors whatsoever, your website quality or lack of website may be one of the contributing factors to that. So, because one of the things, first of all, your digital presence, your ability to come up in search rankings when Google, when you get Googled, has to do with the content that's on your website. Google is crawling through all the websites and trying to find things. And so if people are typing Episcopal Church, blank place, churches near me, whatever it might be, Google is taking that information and trying to find websites that are going to match that. The harder it is for your website to be able to import that data to Google, as Google does those crawls, the lower down your church is going to appear in searches when people are looking for a church. And my guess is that, okay, who has recently looked for a church? Anyone in here recently looked for one?
3 or 4 years ago.
Did you Google churches before you went in?
Well, you did. What did you find?
I like the website.
Okay, you like the website, yeah.
So I found whenever I'm out of town and I try to visit an Episcopal church, how hard it is for some parishes to put up what their schedule is. Or
Yeah.
Lent from 2 years ago.
We're gonna hit that point, yeah, some of those real low-hanging fruit things that are really off-putting to people. That we don't think of because we're not checking the website all the time. So this point is that people decide whether they're going to visit before they even come near your property. They certainly will never visit your church if they don't know you exist. And so that's, again, one of those things where you want to get high in Google search results. So we have people on our connection card describe how they found us. 50% of people say they found us through a Google search. 50% say every other reason. Right? So by and away, the largest cause of people coming to Trinity Oshkosh is that they Googled Episcopal church near me, inclusive church near me, liturgy church near me, any of those sorts of things. And that's what led them to come to Trinity, ultimately. So you want this to leave a good impression and give them the information they need to get to your church. So we think about websites internally, largely. We think about things like vestry minutes and education content and forms for filling out for using space, all the sorts of things that members think about. Those are terrible uses of your website. That is, a website should not first and foremost be for the members of the church. The website is largely a marketing tool. You may have a page for member resources. That you really shouldn't have more than about one page that is internally focused. You can use other systems like your church management software, a Google Drive, things like that to store all the stuff that insiders need to have access to. The website should be optimized for people who are looking to visit your church. So answer the questions people are actually asking. What time does your service start? This is the number one thing people are looking for. What time does your service start and where is your church? If those two things are not front and center, people are not going to dig deep, or at least they're not going to really want to come to your church. You need to have people be able to answer right away, what time does worship happen and where is worship happening? Then, where do I park? What do I wear? This is particularly, if you have a church that does have a tradition of a particular formality of dress, people should know that so they don't get there and get embarrassed. Similarly, if it is a come as you are kind of place, be clear about that. Clarity is your friend here. This is not the time to tell people, oh, don't worry, it doesn't matter, if it really does matter. You need to be honest about what that is. Will anyone make me stand up and announce to myself, what happens to my kids if I bring kids with me? Are they allowed to stay with me? Do they have to stay with me? What is going to happen with children? So answering these is not some sort of concession to marketing culture. It's not some sort of concession to consumerism. This is a way of offering hospitality to people and being clear and telling the truth about the place that they are looking to come. So, what I would like you all to do is, if you have a church website and you have an ability to pull up your church website right now. And then without much scrolling, I want you to see if you can answer these three things.
So it's not a first time here sublink in the second paragraph. It is like the landing page.
It's the landing page, or if there is a new here, how do you find that new here, plan your visit thing? There should not be more than one click away for a plan your visit page if you have one.
This is a closed website. Yeah, this is listed as 218. Closed on Saturday. So our Connects to, just with our Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm new and using like this information to fill out, so I think that's probably like a little bit hard, it's like drawing there.
And it's also confusing with part
Now, beyond this, Kyle, do you know if someone doesn't have a website, is there diocesan support for building a website for a church?
I don't know the answer to that.
No, although I was just talking to my colleague Jen, who is communications, and she works with this really incredible woman, Mariah, who's on our staff, who does a lot of social media. If you've seen the diocese on social media, and we actually were just having a conversation about Mariah saying, I wonder if congregations would want some help if I could like help congregations with their websites. So I think the reality is, yes, there is. It is not formalized, but if you or a congregation you know would like some help, please reach out to the communications department or to one of us here, and we'd be happy to connect you.
I can also say it has never been easier to build an attractive website. Services like Squarespace, like Wix, like I'm not sure what some of the other ones are that are out there though, but that are basically drag and drop. You don't have to have any coding ability. Will let you at least get a front page that has those pieces of information people are looking for. Oh, okay, there you go.
Just terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
This is a good point. Also, sometimes those you want to always check your website both on a phone or tablet and a computer. Most people are checking on their phones or tablets, and many website services will optimize for mobile. But sometimes it will change the layout, and that might be what that's the result of. Is that you might have an attractive website on your desktop that when it gets optimized for mobile looks like trash.
Says donate.
We have to get
So how important is like font choice, level of pictures, like, has there been any research on that, or is it really just super basic?
So yeah, the question is how important is essentially your brand kit, your visual identity. So that's your font hierarchy, colors, sort of decisions about pictures. I'd love to say it's really important because my side hustle is graphic design and graphic design for churches. I build websites actually. That's one of the things I do for churches. I don't know. My sense is that having the information people are looking for readily available is more important than having a super slick website that doesn't have that information. Now, your point earlier about times. If you have your Christmas times on your website when someone is searching for Ash Wednesday or Holy Week, that's a problem. And it's a problem that happens more than you would realize.
The Christmas times, right?
Those need to be, you should have, when there are service updates, those should go on the front page of your website so people know, and then immediately be taken down. Whoever does your website needs to put a Google Calendar or whatever calendar app they are, event that says put up times, and then the day after, take down times. Those need to be removed ASAP. So a no on any of these is almost certainly a gap that is costing you visits. And so this is one of the things that has come out in the research is that churches that have a discrete planning your visit or new here section that has all of that information about things like childcare, critical beliefs, the parking situations, what time your services are, what you have to wear, that is a driver of growth. People want to have an easy to access new here, plan your visit page that they can go directly to that is easy to access from your front page. But absent that, and I'll talk about this later, having all of that information on your front page is also good. One of the principles I'm going to repeat over and over, it is better to do a little bit really well than to try to do a lot very poorly. So fewer pages on your website that give all the information people need, that are regularly updated, that allow people to see the true nature of your community and answer their questions, are better than having tons and tons and tons of pages that try to showcase every ministry you have, but then showcase a ministry that doesn't exist anymore. Or show all pictures of people who are all dead, as though they're actually actively involved in the life of your community. Right? So, the next thing we're going to talk about is that anxiety lowering that comes with the information that's on your new visitor page. So, people don't want to feel awkward coming to church. People don't want to feel like they're going to be judged. People don't want to feel like they're going to have to stand up and introduce themselves. That's a practice that I hope is completely gone by the wayside, is new members having to stand up and introduce themselves in services. If people have children, they want to know their children are going to be safe, and they're not going to be judged for having children in worship. Now, it's also true that if they are going to be judged for having children in worship, fix that. But before you fix that, you need to figure out kind ways to signal that to people. Right? The worst thing that can happen is that your website says, we are a place that loves children in worship, loves noise, and then after the service someone comes up and tells them, please don't come back with your noisy children. Which happens. Or aggressively encourages a mother to take her baby to the nursery. Don't do that. Actually, that was an experience. I was running summer seminary in the Diocese of South Dakota, and we had an instructed Eucharist at a church. And my wife was also a priest, had our 1-year-old with us. And she's crazy. Our 1-year-old was a crazy kid. She's a pastor's kid. She thought she owned every church space. We were also incognito. Neither of us we were both in our cities. And so we had a woman in that service come up and aggressively recommend multiple times that our daughter would be much happier in the nursery. Don't do that. Again, part of hospitality is putting up with a little bit of discomfort and disruption in worship. Most of the time, I'm also going to tell you, parents aren't excited about having their kids losing their minds. That's not something that most parents are like, oh yeah, I love this, and I feel completely oblivious to what everyone's concerns are. So those are great times to offer reassurance rather than condemnation. So if nothing exists that is there to lower anxiety about expectations, about dress, about how children are or are not welcome in church, that is a really great low-hanging fruit for you to add that very close to the top of your website. Another point is, if you are in a place where you are the only inclusive church in town, make a big deal of that on your website. Make sure people know that this is a safe place to come if you are a woman who's interested in being involved in church leadership, or an LGBTQ person. Make that very apparent if that is true about your place. You should make that apparent anyway, but one of the things that actually may be costing you visits, if that is sort of the niche that you exist in, is if that is not readily apparent in your website. Now, also, be honest. If it is a community in which there is some conflict around inclusion, even if you are officially inclusive, probably name that. So actually, for a long time, the language we used is, we are a fully inclusive congregation. The official policy of our congregation is that no one will be denied access to any sacraments or leadership positions as a result of their gender or sexual identity. But not everyone in our church is of one mind on this issue. What we're trying to signal is, you may have a conversation with someone who is not affirming, but the official position of the church is affirming. So if you have that sort of situation where there's a significant number of people who disagree with the official position of your church and may make that known, that should be something that people are cued to. So then, a photo audit. Do the photos show what your church will actually be like? Now, sometimes this goes in the wrong direction, and it's so literal that it's only pictures of the church. That's not good. People want to see pictures of people. But if you only have pictures from the biggest blowouts that you do throughout the year, or, heaven forbid, stock photos that are not of people who actually go to your church, people are not going to get a good impression of your community, or they'll get an overly good impression of your community. And then they'll show up and they'll find out,
Catfish.
well, yeah, what is this, what's going on?
False advertising.
Yes,
This isn't a question for general discussion, because it could be a whole day, but where we are, St. Peter's Sycamore, we
Yeah.
have an old website,
okay.
and we have a new one
Oh.
that was created within the last year. Is it possible to get rid of the old one so that the
Very much
former
so.
rector no longer appears as the clergy in?
Yeah, there's generally pretty easy.
I'll talk with you later.
Do take the time and money to hire someone who knows how to migrate a domain. And what you can do is you just migrate your domain over so that it redirects to your new website. So no one will ever see the old website. You basically are taking it off. But you can, I'm sure that there are probably like,
So you can archive photos that you want to keep.
yes, so this would be something where maybe even reaching out to the communications folk at the diocese, that they can walk through how do you just download those things that you want to keep and just have someone have an auto redirect to your new website. Yeah, that's very, very doable. The other thing though, I will say, and so this is the balancing act. You also don't want to have crappy photos on your website. So first of all, we all line up and take our group photo. Those pictures, don't do those. Those are, people want to see people living out the life of the church. Candid pictures are what you want from people. Pictures of people actually doing things. Make sure that they are high resolution. There are ways that you can compress high resolution photos so it doesn't take up too much space. If this is over your head, don't worry about what I'm saying at all. Basically what I'm saying is don't have grainy photos on your website. And so that means that you also need to take pictures of things that you do. So it's a good idea maybe to start building in who is going to be your photographer at events so you get some of that life of the community pictures. Or take the time to invest once or twice in having a photographer come and actually like take professional photos of your space while it is being used. We actually did that, so we now have a reserve of about 200 stock photos just of worship because we had a photographer come on 2 Sundays and take just pictures of worship because I am normally the photographer and that's a really hard time for me to take pictures.
How do you navigate pictures and minors?
You should have a photo release, and I'm sure that the diocese has like a policy related to photo release for Safe Church. So look at whatever that is. It's a good idea. Certainly, if there are pictures of children that you're going to use, document permission from parents or guardians to use those pictures, even if it's not a photo release yet. What you want to move towards is having a photo release for them. Another thing you can do is when you do your new member onboarding, make sure to say, sort of, by joining the church, you are de facto submitting to have photos used in publicity. If you don't want that, please let us know in writing. But certainly for minors, you should work towards having a documented photo release that is on file. The next thing to do is, like with that walkthrough, hire someone who is in your target demographic that you want to be visitors to your church to give you the complete and total unhinged review of your website. Give them sort of, let them go wild and say, again, where are the friction points? What were you looking for that you couldn't find? What looks bad? What looks good? What were you drawn to? And then finally, what are the adjectives that you would use to describe this community? If that is not how you or many other people in your church would describe your community, there's a gap that needs to be filled there. And that either needs to be filled by, if you look at the website and think it accurately displays your church, you maybe need to re-narrate what your community is like. If those adjectives don't describe, and you're really sure that they don't describe what your church is like, you need to rethink how your website is presenting who you are. With all of these, it's important to remember that these are just one data point. The more data points that you can build up, the better. But don't do the thing we often do, which is try to push away the negative feedback. You want to take the negative feedback into account because this is not about us just wanting to feel good about our communities. This is about us wanting to actually contribute to the proclamation of the kingdom of God. This is about wanting to actually reach more people to be engaged in this ministry of reconciliation. And that's not going to happen if we just continue to try to just pat ourselves on the back. What I'll say too is if you feel like you're already doing all of this well and you want to go next step, talk to me after or email me. There's ways that you can go into getting like Google ads. We were talking about that a little bit at lunch. Google ads, you can get up to $10,000 a week of free Google ads as a nonprofit. There are ways to do SEO optimization, or SEO is search engine optimization, but SEO and AIO, so optimizing your website for search engines and for artificial intelligence searching. There are ways that you can improve your brand kit or getting a brand kit and visual identity if you don't have that. So there's things that you can do to go further. But if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, we've got a lot of work to do, don't even worry about those things yet. Just start with how can we improve our website so that it more accurately depicts who we are and make sure people know what they need to know. And again, when in doubt, make sure do less better than more poorly. So if you're going to connect the dot between these two audits that you just did shortly, remember that your website makes a promise and your building either delivers or betrays it. Sometimes, I guess your website makes a promise and your building exceeds it. That's probably rare. Your website makes a promise and your building either delivers or betrays it. So, what I want you to do is think about decision points for each domain. Before we move into our breakout sessions, what are you going to do from those audits that we just did? And in a perfect world, and that's this world that we're in right now, you're gonna name who's gonna take care of it and when you're gonna get it done by. Another note while you were thinking about this to point to, something else that Tricia Lyons actually brought up, who was the VTS professor, is that lean into your weird in your website. Lean into the mystical, lean into the sacramental, lean into the transcendent. Show pictures of candles, show pictures of worship, show pictures of people engaged in the sort of stuff that is a little bit off kilter from what we expect in society. This is not actually the time to sort of say, look, we're kind of like the Rotary, or we're kind of like the United Way. This is the time to lean into what is particular about us as religious people and Christians in particular. And because a lot of what people are looking for is that connection with the transcendent, even if they haven't named it as such. They are looking for the weird. That's something that, and there's actually like documented sources on. Tara Isabel Burton actually has a couple books that are basically pointing towards the rise of like weird Christianity, the Gothic, the macabre, the transcendent, the sacramental, all of these things. This is what seekers are looking for. They're not looking for just another social hangout place or another service club. So if you can do that authentically, make sure to throw some of those pictures in there. Make the first picture people see a warm but transcendent worship experience. So I'll say, if you want, I'm pretty proud of our website. Again, trinitymosh.org, but what you'll see is the first thing is an elevation at the Eucharist. That is the first thing you see on our website. Our website also has a lot more than any of you should need to have. It was intentional, and that's also because there's someone who is able to manage all of that. If you don't have someone who can manage all of that, half or even a quarter of the kind of stuff that you would look at on our website is all that you really need to have. So, as we wrap up, we remember that The point is that when someone comes, when the stranger comes, it is not just the stranger who we are loving as a person who is made in the image of God. We are welcoming the stranger who is Christ. When the stranger can't find the bathroom, Christ cannot find the bathroom. When the stranger gets back in the car and decides to go home, Christ has gotten back in the car and decided to go home. When the stranger has no one talk to them at coffee hour, Christ has had no one talk to them at coffee hour. The goal is not just institutional preservation. That's not really our purpose. Our purpose is to welcome the stranger at the door, the person wandering your parking lot, looking for a bathroom, wondering if anyone is going to speak to them, because that person is Christ. So that's the standard. And that institutional hygiene is entirely within all of our reach. So, we're about to move into our next breakout sessions, and so again, some questions to prime the pump. What is one thing from this afternoon you most need to not let yourself off the hook about? Where are you already implementing some of these practices? So look at your bright spots. Where are the places, whether that's individual ministries, whether that's individual physical places in your church, that's happening? And how can you get the person who is making that happen to help that happen everywhere in your church? And what would it look like 90 days from now for your building or website to be meaningfully more hospitable? Be detailed. What does that look like? Map that out. Draw a picture of it, verbally or physically. So, if you're able to get these down, I'm going to put up my, before you walk out, I'm going to put up my last slide that has my email address on it. I also have a number of cards, so if you want to be able to stay in touch, we can do that. And I'll stick around for a little bit after the breakout session for just a little bit more conversation. But it has been amazing to be with you all today. I love the energy of this group. I know that God is doing wonderful and amazing things here in the Diocese of Chicago, and I could not have been more honored to have come and have this conversation with you.